and CFD. I'd like to go ahead and get started today. So, Rick, yeah, thank you. So today's agenda, we're just going to do some introductions and housekeeping very briefly, just so everyone's kind of aware of what's going on here. We'll do a SimuTech overview just very briefly, then we'll get into the introduction to cloud computing as well as our offering of SimuCloud. So my name's Eric Underwood. I'm Director of Marketing at SimuTech. I've got with me Rick James, who's the Vice President of Consulting Services. Rick will be doing the bulk of the presentations and demo today, and has been our leader on SimuCloud and can answer everyone's questions pertaining to SimuCloud. So glad to have Rick with us today. So just a few housekeeping. We are going to record this session, so if you have an issue with being on a recording, feel free to drop off. We are recording, obviously, so you could review the recording later. All attendees will be muted, so if you need to ask us, we are going to have a question and answer session as we go. And if you have a question, please use the question box as shown. You can type that in, and we will get that before the hour is up. So with that, I think I'll turn this over to Rick.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. So we're going to go through a little bit of the background on cloud technology, talk a little bit about ANSYS, and talk about what's kind of going on in the market. Eventually show you a really quick demo of kind of what the SimuCloud interface is, and then there's tons of implications of this in terms of how you would actually use it in a typical workflow. And that's to say that maybe there is no typical workflow, but we'll make some assumptions. Look forward to your questions. I think that's been one of the more helpful, just really getting into people's individual questions. I can also say this is a bit of a journey. So most of the clients that we've worked with, and we've been working on SimuCloud on and off for about 3 years now, with a heavy effort in the last year. But this is definitely a learning process that we've seen for most of the clients we've talked to. And most of the people we are talking to are people that SimuTech has known for years, even decades, and really just looking to avoid capital expenditures or minimize them, or just they have burst project needs. So we'll get into that a little bit, but I think one of the things that we found is that it's very much a learning process. So there's definitely challenges some of the status quo. So one aspect about SimuTech, if you're not familiar, we've really built a business around ANSYS. So we're very much a services-oriented company. So consulting, tech support, training, mentoring. We have a whole suite of complementary software for fatigue and optimization. We also do some testing. So all of this is really focused around the finite element and fluid dynamics tools that ANSYS offers. So with that, we see the cloud as an extension of that. So we've been working with ANSYS on looking at licensing schemes and getting licensed out in the cloud, and we've been working with ANSYS on that for a number of years, and so that's kind of where they've actually recognized us, even at the most recently, as being really the company driving most of the public cloud for finite element. So cloud computing means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I think kind of just for clarity, I'll use that term a lot in this presentation. So I don't want it to be overly cliche or too general, but cloud does mean a lot of everything inside this cloud. It could mean storage, networking, communication, back-end monitoring, and then we've got all these access points. And who's to say there's wristwatches that's going to come up next too, perhaps. So using whatever technology, or whether it's just a command prompt or some visual graphical access points, you can get in. But for the most part, what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about with SimuCloud, is really first and foremost computing. Right? We're really, I'm a finite element guy, and I've done some CFD, but we're really interested in getting solves done quicker, and multiple solves, during design of experiments or whatever, with hardware. And obviously we have to have storage, and we have to have some bandwidth. So these are really kind of our key things that, in terms of what we present for clients. Of course, all these back-end identity and queuing are things that we take into account. We try to make those a little bit transparent, but But just so we know that cloud computing is kind of, we're really on the computing, we should have that in all caps or something. So we are an Amazon partner, so this is one that they're just down the street from us here in Seattle. We also have a long relationship with Microsoft, but that's not part of our offering right now. So a couple of clients that are also using this, Ericsson, a longtime cell and communications company. A little bit more technical aerodynamic solutions, doing a lot of the, some of these terms you may not necessarily know, but they've used it quite a bit. European Space Agency, and then the one that is maybe even overused a bit is the whole NASA and JPL. Done a lot with the NASA Mars rover Curiosity. So the interesting thing about this too was ITAR, which is in the U.S. State Department, has the extra restrictions for certain military Department of Defense type contracts. So and what that really states is really the security that Amazon has put in is pretty airtight. Some of the benefits, and this is somewhat generic, right, if we can talk about cloud computing, but I think one of my thesis points throughout this whole presentation is the fact that really the cloud is about economics, right? There's the hardware that you can buy, the hardware that's made available on the cloud, you could go buy it. The storage, the networking, all the raw technology is available off the shelf. So ultimately, it's it's access and all these other benefits, but ultimately it's the ability of taking where you have to buy $10,000 or $100,000 worth of capital and moving that into a variable. So it's really that CapEx to OpEx, which is capital expenditure to operating expenditure, kind of slang term. And really the economies of scale, like Amazon has orders of magnitude, more capacity than most regional or local data centers, or even big corporate data centers, in elastic capacity. So this is somewhat of an Amazon term, but really the ability that if you want 2 computers or 20 computers, that you don't have to sign up for a fixed capacity. And even speed and agility, like we'll show you that booting up a computer can take a few minutes. So being able to log on to our portal, but then booting up other computers just takes no time at all. It really does allow you to focus on business. I mean, you look at the time it takes to actually go through the acquisition process, especially if it's capital expenditure and you have a big approval loop within a company. Like there is, a definite amount of time, i.e. money. So there's a lot of benefits there, especially when you look at software licensing on the operating system side on like Server 2008, 2012. Security and risk mitigation. So we have seen some companies that actually see using SimuCloud as actually risk mitigation, or they don't actually maybe plan on using it a whole lot up front, but they never know. Like they've had natural disasters. Once company lost 2,000 hard drives in a flood not too recently, and they were having some really interesting even discussions with them. Security, so obviously there's another slide here on security that is, we'll kind of get a little more granular, but obviously if you don't trust your network, you probably shouldn't use it. So we trust the network and we want you to trust it as well. And really global reach. Amazon's a global company. They've got data centers throughout the world, so it really is a great solution for companies that are looking at multi-continent solutions, especially as it relates to Patriot Act and government, the way the U.S. government looks at data and the way that European agencies look at data. And so we have data centers that SimuCloud does around the world as well. So back on the economics, again, this is kind of a key point, and this is a great slide or presentation that really is looking at kind of, if I look at predicted usage, then this might actually be your install base. So say you've got a whole slew of clusters, however your project load, which is the green line, and so this difference in between here, maybe waste is maybe a simplistic term, but it's just underutilization. Maybe it's a little more technical. So you're still running air conditioners, you're still powering, you're still employing staff to go maintain these computers, and then perhaps a design cycle comes up, or you've got a preliminary design review for and all of a sudden now your usage is way up here, or obviously at this point there should be a dotted green line because you don't actually have actual usage because you don't have capacity. And let's say again your capacity is down here, so here we've got missed opportunity. So I think kind of the cloud computing solution is if I actually came kind of perfectly mimicked or near perfectly mimicked the actual demand curve. So again, that's kind of maybe a more graphical perspective in terms of the pay for what you use. And I think that's a pretty real terminology or pretty real scenario. To go back on security, so this is just a simple graph showing there's many forms of security: physical security, platform, and network. So these are all sorts of certifications that Amazon has. So maybe the one that's a little bit closest to us in Seattle, we have a huge aerospace foundation in the Pacific Northwest, no surprise with Boeing and all their suppliers. So ITAR is really huge for us. So we work on a number of ITAR projects, and it's really important to us to be able to have that capability. There's also a ton of medical device companies that SimuTech works with throughout the United States, and that would be the HIPAA. And then Motion Picture Association. So again, all these are really, really important, really critical, and I believe that Amazon's done a really great job of meeting that. There's kind of another way of looking at some of the security. So we call this the data in flight. So whether you're behind the firewall in your company, or you're at home, you're on the road, or even in the air at 30,000 feet, being able to have that data in flight, 256-bit encryption. With Amazon's EC2, which is again their name for the computers, there's a firewall. There's actually the Server 2008 operating system firewall, and then your actual Windows login that's driven by Active Directory, which is almost every company in North America uses that for their login management. So there's also disk encryption. So if you choose to do this, you can actually do on-disk encryption, which is typically BitLocker, but there's other tools as well. This sort of scenario is really what helps build confidence in the fact that this is a safe environment for putting your data, for storing your data, for solving it. And we have a lot of companies that do that already with SimuCloud. To dive into the costs, again, back to this theme of cost. So we have an evergreen pricing policy, which is kind of a new term. So ultimately, we kind of keep our margins fixed. So as soon as Amazon drops their prices, or any other provider that we choose to use in the future, we pass along those direct savings to our clients. So the largest portion of SimuCloud is hardware. So when we look at computing, and there's a couple slides, it might be $1 per hour, and again, that's not per core, that's for the whole server. We can go up as high as $6, really depends on if you want large RAM and large CPU and GPUs. Like, there's a pretty huge range in there. The storage and bandwidth, so bandwidth is typically very small. Storage is usually about 5 to 10% of the computing. That's just kind of the way it works out. From a consulting services, this is an optional, so we do have some companies excuse me, that have asked, we'd really like to run MATLAB out on the cloud. We really like to run ANSYS version 8, some older version. So we can actually create custom images for clients. And right now we've got, I think, the last 3 or 4 versions of ANSYS out there as a standard install. And we also have a SimuCloud Portal fee. So we do have 2 tiers. So if you're just interested in going out and grabbing a computer, using it, and then getting your data and shutting it down and reformatting, that's fine. If you would also like a more enterprise level, we've got, I have another slide on this in the future, but we actually have an ability where you can go network computers together. So if you're looking at doing 128 core HPC with Fluent or something like that, or even 32 core, that ability to network multiple computers, the ability of having your own FTP site, so you can log in, and even having separate post-processing computers that are much cheaper than your hardcore solving computers. So there's definitely a strategy that we can discuss in terms of how to really optimize your economics of using the cloud. So again, kind of that very much mindful of it's not just the technology, it's also the economics that are really a key part of this. So I think there's lots of cloud providers out there. one of the things that we really focus on is being Ansys Specific. So we've helped clients very much go in and actually optimize how they partition their CFD to optimize their HPC runs. Being able to talk about the difference between rotating disk and solid-state disk for PCG solver versus SPAR. So again, SimuTech has about 31 years of very specific ANSYS expertise. We want to help you guys get out there on the cloud and make advantage and really take an optimal use of your ANSYS licenses. We also designed our portal specifically by CFD, FEA analysts. So the real technical programmer architect is Camby's. He's one of my PhD fluid dynamics guys here in the Seattle office, and he is a really gifted programmer, and he's a really heavy Fluent user. We've tricked him a couple times, and he's done some FEAs too, but mostly he really designed this to set up to be a user. So that's a really another key thing, and we always welcome suggestions for the user experience feedback. And really our goal in terms of this was to optimize ANSYS solves. So really we're not here to sell hardware. Our kind of philosophical goal that is really to cover our costs, but we're out to try to make the most use of ANSYS. So this is something we use in our internal consulting. So SimuTech has about 60 engineers. Most of those are Finite Element. But we do use SimuCloud for consulting, and we do maintain a very healthy in-house hardware capacity. But again, much like that curve, a lot of times, not very often, but sometimes that hardware is underutilized, and then whenever really the project demands and our clients agree to it, then we go out to the cloud, and that's been a great solution. So to some extent, this is very much developed in-house, and we're actually users, so we're somewhat clients of our own tools. So and I think also kind of in line with that first slide where I kind of show we've built a business around ANSYS, we really, as a services company, we're very interested in customizing for your business needs. So not everybody has the same needs. We have some people that would like to outsource everything. They don't want to have any in-house capacity. We've had some companies that have roll paddles with their IT department, and they really don't want to have to deal with that anymore. And we don't like to get into politics. We like to focus on kind of business objectives, but ultimately I think whether it's installing other software, or we've even talked about installing CAD software. We've even talked about one company that has some overseas operations. They're very concerned about piracy. So we talked about a graphics-only solution where they couldn't actually pull down the data. It would only be graphical access only. I've heard other companies that their data set focuses on like 1 terabyte for this large CFD run, and they can't actually move it around, so it's actually easier for them to keep it in a central location and actually just have people from around the country log in and view that and manipulate it just all on the cloud. So there's definitely, the cloud opens up some new possibilities in how, again, workflow, not just being able to solve, that's critical too, but workflow issues are really key. So one of the most common questions we get is really the license option, so the ANSYS license. Again, this is probably an area, if you guys have questions, feel free to chime in. I'll kind of do a brief overview here. And it's really, we can do monthly leases from SimuTech Group. So that's where we've had some people that, again, had very short-term needs. Maybe they wanted to bring their solver license in they owned a solver, so we used a VPN connection, and then they rented an HPC license for us, maybe even a 3-month or 6-month. If perhaps they have all their licenses, they needed faster computing or something with more RAM. We actually have computers that go up to 244 gigs of RAM on a single node. So again, if you're a finite element person and you're doing sparse and you want to do everything in core, the sparse is pretty RAM hungry. You start doing some of the math backwards and you're like, gosh, I can solve a huge problem from a degree of freedom problem and how many elements. So, solving 8 to 10 million elements, from a sparse solver, that's usually been kind of a no-no just because you're going to solve forever because it's out of core and scratched into the disk. So anyways, bringing your own license is one area that using VPN, this is a really common way that we're working with customers. And then also just we have one client that actually has moved their whole license server out to the cloud. So the company that makes FlexLM actually has an options file, so you can actually go out and kind of like a mini firewall, you can actually restrict which IP addresses can access that, and you can do some really pretty creative things to actually secure that license server out on the cloud. So this way you can still grab that license server from behind your firewall. You can also grab it at home, and you can grab it on the cloud. So it's a very flexible way of, maybe that's a bad pun, the FlexLM, but actually it's pretty, I can say it's not very common, but we do have one client in particular that's doing that. So trying if there's anything else here that's really relevant, but it's very secure. There's no data out there. Ultimately, it's a FlexLM server with just a license. So I'll show you a quick, this is just a snapshot. It's actually a video, but I'm not going to show it just because I'll do a live demo here in a second. But this is actually the SimuCloud Portal. So we've got some projects and then nodes, and this is a wizard that's showing the selection. We've got some color-coded based on which computers you have, and then also kind of a CPU utilization graph. And then this is just being able to connect into the remote desktop. So ultimately, I figured I'd throw in some benchmarks here and just kind of show some of the scalability. So it's a simple flow of a car. It's a pretty big model. I think it's, I forgot now, 4 million elements, so it's not too huge. But we're going to kind of work right to left, which is maybe opposite. But just looking at 3 different computers. Case 3, the green one, is the Amazon computer, and then I had 2 in-house computers just to show. And this is an i7 computer, and then admittedly a relatively old Xeon 5300. So it is a Xeon 3 gigahertz. So we can kind of see the baseline, and ultimately what we see is these Xeon Sandy Bridge, and this is a 16. They're 16 core nodes, so this is actually looking at 2 nodes. Looking at distributed. So we actually have fairly good scalability. Usually I'd like to see a little bit more, but ultimately that's a pretty good scalability even at the 8-core node. And actually it's rounded down. It's actually a little bit closer to 8. So I think the message here is that 2.6 gigahertz on this Intel, they certainly make faster clock speeds, and this does have turbo boost, I think, to 3.3. But the fact is that this is really, really rock solid computer. This is a great one to go out. Again, if you're kind of tying that to your ANSYS license usage, one HPC pack gets you the 8 cores, and really we did the benchmark just looking at what 2 HPC packs could get you. And I think even maybe a better way of looking at this is how many iterations per day, because I think that's a little better business perspective at looking at scalability. This is kind of the mathematician's way of looking at it, which I think is appropriate, but so these are great computers. Looking at the Finite Element, so again, just kind of plucking out one of the, it's a V14 benchmark, but I think it was done on 14.5, which is the current release. And again, I kind of show my graph the opposite. And ultimately, I kind of assuming that my baseline is really the 2-core. The absolute time maybe doesn't mean as much, but really looking at the fact that on this linear model that's decent size of 3 million degrees of freedom, we're getting 6.8 x, 7x at 8 cores. That's really good. And then really at 16 cores, which I really don't expect any scalability, ultimately it goes up. But this is really the sweet spot, I think, in terms of Finite Element. So again, the Xeon chips are very good at FEA, very good for high I/O applications. Some of the deliverables. So ultimately, we've talked a lot about the cloud and strategy and security and stuff like that. But ultimately, the SimuCloud deliverable is this listed here. So the portal access kind of being the key. We've got upgrades coming, whether that's ANSYS 15 when that comes out, possibly later this year. We'll certainly upgrade that when new service packs. Tech support. So this is not physics tech support. If you're actually getting if you actually have a license from another channel partner, or ANSYS Direct. So the physics support would come from that, but if you had portal support, or even kind of the next bubble there, really the FlexLM support, that's what SimuTech would provide that. And ultimately graphical remote access to the portal, so which really gets you to the cloud. So we do use remote desktop connection, and that's one of the most standard, like every Windows computer has that. And we've kind of gone with non-proprietary, we've gone to non-proprietary methods just because I can go on my iPhone and download a free app and access the cloud through my iPhone or like any tablet, Android or Apple. So that's been kind of I think in hindsight it was a good decision. There's certainly higher frame rate tools and proprietary compression and stuff like that, and we benchmarked most of those and thought that they were really good and kind of confusing too sometimes. So that is really the front end of the presentation that's kind of into the PowerPoint. So at this point I'm going to kind of get into discussion. And I also want to kind of give a plug for in 2 days we actually have a hands-on workshop using SimuCloud. So ultimately what you'll get is a remote computer. We've actually done this for up to 85 people at one time, again kind of showing off that agility and that capacity of Amazon. So ultimately what you get is if you're a finite element person, you'd like to see what is that experience. There's nothing like experiencing something to actually understand how it works, especially when so far if this is your first exposure, it's been very PowerPoint centric. I'm a firm believer in experiencing things to understand how they work. It could be too if you're a finite element person and really like to play around with CFD. We've got some really, if you've gone to training, typically there's lecture and workshop, but what we've done is kind of created workshops that were very much very simple and very streamlined and very trying to understand the basics of what's going on. But we think you'll really like it. We've been doing this for a few years. We've been actually doing this about 3 years ago. We started with laptops going around, and that worked really well. And then we decided, man, why won't we try this on the cloud? So I'd really encourage you if you have time, and Eric can give you some more information. We can follow up with an email if you'd like to sign up for that. We have plenty of space, so please sign up. So at this point, let me go ahead and hop out and jump into, this is actually the SimuCloud Portal interface. So ultimately, just to dive in, like I am logged in under my name, we've got some settings, and again, we did kind of steal the motif from Windows, which I guess is formerly Metro, but we do have the ability to actually organize your files or your folders. So if I wanted to create a new project, Rick FEA, very creative, I know, but eventually that will show up over here, and I can actually have a folder there. At this point, I'm actually under the benchmarking folder, and I've got 2 computers. So this black one actually means that my computer is put to sleep. So this is actually, as you can see, if I hover over, I can see a few different options. Now this is actually one that I've done, kind of did the cooking show where I can pull this out of the oven now, but ultimately this is actually started up, so I have more options here. So I can actually duplicate this computer. I can also share it. So in this case, if I'd like to share it with some of the other people on the SimuTech team, in this case, Jason's back, and maybe you know some of these people. I'll go ahead and share it with Mosen. So maybe I forgot to share with Mosen. So now if I came down under share computers and perhaps Mosen had actually shared a computer with me, this is one way that a team can actually, with multiple different logins, can actually share their computers. So we've seen some people that actually choose to actually just use one login for the whole company. And of course, the whole company is probably 2 or 3 people. But anyway, so the key thing is that now that I've highlighted the screen, I have a little legend up here. I can kind of see my CPU utilization. I can dive in and see the network, the disk, and again, there's not really any disk. And really, the only CPU utilization you can see, 6%, is really just to boot up. But I can dynamically move my time frame if I was running this for a really long time. wanted to hone in. This is also a way that I could log in and see how my, if my job had completed, if I didn't actually have the, if I wasn't directly logged into the computer watching the log file or something. So I'm going to go ahead and show just creating a new computer. So ultimately this gets, my first option is, do I want a networked or standalone node? So this gets back to those two flavors of the portal I was talking about. So in this case, I want to create a network node. So this is one where we do Active Directory out on the cloud. So this allows computers to see each other. And the next is really getting in on the cost. So you can also see up here we've got pre-configured, we've got Ireland and Northern Virginia. So Amazon has numerous data centers. These are the two that we've set up so far. We've had really good success in terms of bandwidth and surprisingly good bandwidth actually to Ireland. In fact, we have a client in Europe, and their speed test to Northern Virginia was 45 megabit, and their speed test to Ireland was 48 megabit, and that's pretty phenomenal. But if you get out and do a little quick searching on the fiber optic maps across the Atlantic, you can see that Ireland's usually one of the first hops on some of the fiber optic. So it's probably a strategic reason why Amazon located there. So we can also put cost here. So this is the CPU cost. And these computers down here are usually just for testing. I don't know, maybe even some of these are good for post-processing. Like this is kind of an estimated clock speed in gigahertz with decent RAM. But the ones we'd really suggest are down here. This is actually one of the ones we just added. So with a solid-state hard drive, 16 real cores, see they're not virtual. Anything that has virtual we stripped out because that's kind of irrelevant for analysis. But there's that 244 gig RAM computer, and there's the price. So we've also got some of the GPU. We've been doing some testing on this. This is not, I think this is the Fermi, the M2050. So the Kepler series is not, which is their latest and greatest, is not supported yet by ANSYS or by Amazon. So NVIDIA has some really great technology out there that's coming around. The one that we use for CFD the most is really this one, which is very high on the core count and very high on the clock with rotating disks. So the real difference here between the last one, we could go on and on about all this different stuff. We're happy to share these costs at a later date. But in this case, I'm just going to jump in and grab one of these standard and go build that. Licenses, this is really key. So by default, we're actually pinging our SimuTech's server, and you can see this is kind of a read-only, but this just goes and pings what we have. So we've got an evaluation license out there. We can also, if you want to ping your corporate license server, you can go type this information in and actually save it. Now this gets saved as encrypted, so no employee at SimuTech has any idea what credentials are. But what it does is it allows this computer that you're building out on the cloud to use your VPN credentials that come back through your firewall, and then this actually, the name server or the IP address would actually be the name of the FlexLM server. So we've had good success with this. This does work for Windows VPN. We're in the process of getting the Cisco and the hardware VPNs going. There's no technical issues. We're just, that's kind of on our development path. So we're going to go ahead and just use the SimuTech Portal server at this time, and then whatever name we want to call it, so that we could call this Flutter, and if how many computers we want, the disk space. Again, if I wanted to share it with people, I'll just for default. I get a little summary here over here on the side, and then now when I click build, I get a little announcement, are you sure you want to build the computer? So at this point, we've got about 30 APIs on this website that are going off and doing certain things, whether it's the CPU utilization. Pretty soon you'll see those other computers show up. So a lot of things going on in this portal. And again, you can see kind of this loading computers. So pretty soon what will happen, another rectangle will show up here, and that will be this other computer. So typically these take about 5 minutes to go off and build. They'll have the full install ready to go. So at this point, I'm going to jump in on this computer that I had already set up, and I am using IE. I think I forgot my security settings here. I'm going to just open this remote desktop connection. I'm going to move things over. Put my fat fingers typed in the password right. And then I get a, is this the identity? So I'm just doing a remote desktop connection. So ultimately I can come in and look at my computer. I'll just go to properties really quick and just kind of verify what I've got. So I've got a Xeon 3 gigahertz and 55 series, so that tells me just kind of my own knowledge that this is the, at least in the Halem class, so there's no front side bus, which is really important for FEA and CFD, but FEA as well. So you can see the versions of ANSYS I had. I was kind of quick there, I know, but we've got 12.1 through 14. So I'll just jump in, and I won't spend a whole lot of time just because it's just looking at ANSYS here, and I'm sure that's not too unfamiliar for most of you. At least I'm making some assumptions there, I realize, but let me also just jump into the cloud. And so now what we've got, this computer I named Flutter 1. I actually named it Flutter, but the portal automatically goes in and increments the name. And again, this was set up for HPC, so when you're setting up computers and simultaneously, like the other day we were doing 128 core CFD run for a client, walking them through for their first time, and you name it Flutter, but if you build 8 computers, then SimuCloud automatically names that 1 through 8 for you, which makes it really easy when you're actually setting up the host file and when you're doing parallel processing. So ultimately this will come back, and you can see down here if I actually, once it comes up, when I click this, I can look down at my status and I can see it's initiated. And what it does, just because the way the Active Directory works and the Windows, it has to go through and reboot a few times. So we've got a whole script out there running right now. Let's jump back in and just see, so there's ANSYS. There's not a whole lot to it, but that's pretty much, I've done some frame rates on this, and essentially it's about sometimes 14 frames per second, sometimes 7 frames per second. It really depends on if you're which monitor you're on and if you're at 16-bit color or 15-bit color. But typically about 7 frames per second seems to be pretty average. Again, kind of the perspective that we have is that we're West Coast, but we typically use the Northern Virginia servers and have great response. So that's pretty much the basics of SimuCloud. Again, this thing we'll go ahead and let it build just so you can kind of see the time. But let's say that we had used this bench 1 computer, and say we used it for a few hours and we were happy and we're done. But we didn't actually want to shut everything down and have the computer rebuild itself. So I can actually go in, and I've got some options here. I can actually do terminate or stop. So terminate would actually kill the computer, delete everything, shut it down, reformat the disk, and be ready for the next person to use the computer. What stop does, if I click that, it says you're about to stop. While it stops, your files will remain unchanged. Only storage. There's no hourly charges, just some storage, and the IP address changes too. So ultimately, I'm going to send this instruction, and it's going to turn from green to black. So this is one way that, again, if you're using SimuCloud in a production sense, it's Friday, you've been doing some post-processing, you're not done yet, you need to finish up another day. You could just put everything, it's the same thing as almost putting your laptop in hibernation, where everything kind of moves to, all the information you have in RAM kind of gets moved to hard disk, and then you can store that. So I'm trying to think if there's any other key parts about this. We also, some of the things that are in development on SimuCloud are really related to finances, being able to show, like, this computer right here, how much have I used in this session, and how much have I used for the whole portal, and even by project. So this has been kind of under development. We're actually merging a bunch of databases, so it's a little bit of some programming tricks, being able to merge, the Amazon database and the our CRM database and then usage database. So, but we definitely want to be able to get summarized information out on a company by company basis. So that's pretty much the portal demo. And then I know we've got quite a few questions here. So let's see. Let me jump back into this and look at. This is just to maybe preemptively talk about just what our portal level. So I talked about this earlier. Ultimately, we are charging a $300 monthly fee, and this can be turned on and off. Like if you don't want to use it, you can just stop the kind of in whole month increments. But so the shared cloud storage, this again is kind of an online persistent FTP. This is very important if you wanted to download your data or something. If you just have the intro level, if you want to download your data on a $6 an hour computer and it took 6 hours to download, then that would be $60. So logically, that you do that once maybe, but longer term, kind of an enterprise level, again, being able to have being able to copy your data off to another server, shared storage, and then be able to kill the expensive solve computer. So again, multi-node HPC, like we're talking about 32 cores or 128, you really need the enterprise level for that interconnect. Active Directory, so again, that's how we actually give root access to a client if they want to manage their own Active Directory. One thing that works for both of these is actually copy and paste data, since remote desktop connection is ultimately Windows. It's actually really cool being able to be on your local computer and just copy a case file or whatever .db file if you're kind of doing APDL, and just go into the cloud computer and Windows Explorer desktop and just Control-V and paste it. So we've got FTP and the copy and paste works for both. And also if we're doing custom install. So again, could be some CAD programs don't work well on the cloud, but we've seen we've been able to get them to work. And then just kind of as an example, being able to look at what some clients have asked for, just kind of being really upfront with their pricing. There's just hourly cost. And then again, this is estimated roughly 500 hours a month. So this is what we've seen is actually very optimistic. That's very heavy usage. 70%, like a lot of clients, aren't necessarily using it that much. But so far, all these are estimates, but we just wanted to give a range. Like if you're looking at something that maybe if you're looking at prep post, which you probably never use it that much if you're just doing prep post, you might use it 4 hours a day for, I don't know, a quarter of the time or something. So anyway, there it is. And we do have a video. Again, this is something in the follow-up. I actually have a YouTube video that kind of goes through this whole presentation. If ever you would like to see it again, and again, we'll have this presentation recorded as well. So I think at this point, I'm going to jump in and let Eric kind of summarize some of the questions. So I know we have a few questions. So Eric, you want to go ahead and summarize those for me?
Sure. Let me grab that real quick. Okay, here we go. So here's the first one. This has to do with cores. Basically, it looks like, if you need more licenses or you're trying to use more, what you have to rent.
Correct. So a quick summary with ANSYS. So with Finite Element, you get 2 cores. That's just kind of the default. But with CFD, you get 1 core. So anytime you want to do any sort of HPC, it requires an individual license or an HPC pack, which is a bundle of 8 licenses. But when you start putting packs together, they grow exponentially. So 1 pack is 8 and 2 packs is 32. So I was trying to be really careful that most people in the CFD, they tend to want to match their hardware to their license. So no sense in having 32 core hardware if you only have licenses for 8. So there's back to that one slide I had where how you can get licenses. So you can rent, if, again, if you're a SimuTech in the SimuTech territory, we can rent licenses to you for CFD and FEA, whatever time increment you want, the lowest being 1 month.
Okay. Next question. Do we have any tools predicting usage, giving mesh size, setup, etc.?
That's a great question. We've actually talked about coming up with an estimator, and ultimately we've decided that the best we can really do is make a suggestion on which computer to use, but not necessarily the duration or anything like that. So it is quite an interesting quandary because you could say, well, gosh, I'm going to use this. I have a finite element job, and I think and it's small transient. So should I use the cheap computer and let it run for longer, or should I use the most expensive computer and let it run for shorter? And those are questions that we can't answer. But I can say that we can give you great suggestions on which ones to dive into. So I think that's be a great time to pick up the phone if you're interested, and we could give some verbal, but we don't have any tools to answer your question specifically. So great question.
All right. Next one has to do with licenses. Does that, and I'm not sure what that was, break the ANSYS license agreement, but maybe we could just cover that in general.
Sure. I know that means ANSYS, cloud in general. So in 14, ANSYS had a subtle change to the license agreement that actually kind of redefined what a WAN was. So a WAN being anything more than a 25-mile radius from where the software is used. And what ANSYS redefined was they said, really, the WAN is defined by where people sit, not by where you solve. So ANSYS actually has kind of taken the different approach where, and I don't think it was really any different from the philosophy of ANSYS. I think it was more the application of the wording, like it's just legacy terminology. But they want people to use the solver. They want people to go use supercomputers and craze and go to University of Texas Supercomputing Center or Illinois or something like that. So they want that, but what they want is, what defines a WAN is where people are sitting, where engineering is being done. So that's maybe the difference. So no, it does not break the ANSYS agreement. I've been dealing with all the main decision makers on ANSYS and their movement into the cloud, Barb Hutchins and Ray Burrell, and this is very clear. So they love what we're doing. So, but that's a great question again.
Getting FEA results back to the local computers.
So a couple of ways, again, back in the workflow issue, we've seen some people that ultimately they only want to use the cloud for solving. So as soon as it's done, they'll go, if they're using Workbench, just go do an archive file. And again, that Control-C, Control-V, like copy and paste it that way, or actually FTP it back. One of the ways that we use it is actually, again, we write tons of consulting reports per year. We'll actually, again, using a remote desktop connection, get the graphics that we want and just use Alt Print Screen and grab the specific frames that we want, and then paste those into a Word or PowerPoint in our documentation. And then if we need animations, dump those off, and then so we'll kind of do what I'd call lightweight post-processing and leave all the data out on the cloud until we're done. And then once we've done and we've got all of our data, we still want that archived most of the time, not always. Most of the time we want that archived on our local computers to then put into a central repository. But the point is that we'll write our report first and then copy the data over. And then it can be over the weekend or overnight, or usually it's again, we're in Seattle. We have a 50 megabit connection for roughly 11 or 12 people, so we get pretty fast data transfer rates. So again, that's kind of a workflow question. So there's probably 2 or 3 ways. I know there's some people, we've not done it ourselves, but when they use Design Explorer, a lot of what they're looking for Design Explorer is just the graphics, not the data. So there's really no need to copy any data back. The same can be said for CFD. We've had some projects where we had a terabyte of transient results on a vortex shedding FSI model. There are fundamental times where it's like, gosh, that is going to take a long time. But again, that's as long as that's time that's not taken away from you writing your report, that's the good way.
All right. Got a question on physical computers versus virtual computers.
So there are the lower end computers that I showed are, I would say, fractional. They do run on a virtualization layer, but the cluster computers do not. So those are actually installed and you actually are on the core OS. So there's not like some Linux background running Windows or anything like that. I have seen some studies where the overhead hit, even on that virtualized layer, can be as low as 3%. So what Amazon does is guarantee a certain level of clock speed, which is great if if you were just running I don't know, like some Photoshop or something like that was just CPU bound. But obviously if you're doing FEA and CFD to a lesser extent, but is very IO bound, and it really dominates the motherboard. So we don't really play nice with other programs. So that's why really, in that one slide where I kind of had preferred, is really those cluster computers that are you pretty much grab and get to own, so to speak.
Okay. Got another question about when you were checking the CPU. Is that something that the users will need to be careful about?
No, I think I was just trying to show you that it's a good chip. Again, maybe a little background on the way that Amazon puts clock speed. So if you saw some of my slides, I showed like 5.5 gigahertz chips, which is not real. Ultimately, what it is Amazon, because they originally had a whole range of architectures from Opterons and Intel Xeons, that they had to come up with a way to normalize the performance. So they actually have a benchmark back, I think it's 2007, 1 gigahertz Opteron, and you've got a lot of development over those, gosh, was it 6 years now? So there's Sandy Bridge and Westmere's, and eventually they'll have Ivy Bridges in there. So all the different architectures. So it's just a way that they keep track of kind of normalizing. Like you buy a certain performance, it may come from the latest technology, it may come from a technology that's a couple years old. But yeah, careful maybe is not what my intent was. I was just letting you actually say, hey, this is a computer that we ordered, so to speak. So.
Okay. There was one slide, I think it's slide 20 or so, where you were showing the different benchmarks for the CFD model.
Sure.
Someone was just asking what the wall time was roughly for that, if you know.
No, I can go follow up and shoot that email. I think kind of my goal is just to show scalability, that ultimately the Sandy Bridge architecture, that 16 core, usually, some of the i7s and some of the ones that have really good clock speed, they're great at like single core performance. They just don't scale out very well. That is a benefit. So yeah, I look it up right now, but I'd have to be quiet for 15 seconds. So we'll send that out in a follow up.
All right, we got 2 more questions that came in that are basically the same. I didn't get a chance to type those in, but basically it's talking about being able to monitor your cost as you go. So, your mid-month, how much have I spent this month already, and so forth.
So, yeah, what we're doing right now, we've got a medical device company that's using this right now, and we're sending them weekly financial updates that just show kind of where they started the week and where they ended the week. And it's that's kind of where we're at. Ultimately, we're really pushing to get the integration with, we use Salesforce for our CRM system, but we've got about 4 systems to integrate to get the right usage and the pricing out there. And we may take a half step and actually get the usage first and get the pricing later, and kind of let you guys make the logical leap. But ultimately, that is a very high priority. Again, back to my thesis point, is that the cloud's all about economics. So we definitely need to get that integrated.
Okay. We're coming up on our hour time frame here, so if there's no more questions, we'll probably go ahead and wrap this up. If you do have a question, go ahead and type that in real quick, and we'll try and get that done in the next few minutes. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and end this session.